About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
And this is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I also explore some relevant news items and answer the questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, so far in these programs, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we are aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects. What we are aware of, usually called the conscious mind. What we aren't aware of, that keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, which is the subconscious mind. And what we aren't aware of, that connects us and guides us in our actions, which we're calling the superconscious. We then learn that we can change our state of consciousness and shift what aspects of minds we are aware of and what we're capable of. From neuroscientists, we learned that the brain modifies whatever it receives from both the body senses and the mind to fit past patterns of experience, following Begg's principle that neurons that fire together wire together and form a default network or structure in the brain. This means that we see and hear and feel what we expect to or believe we will experience. We also learned that while it's possible to say where in the brain various processes are active, no one has yet been able to pinpoint where memories are stored or how ideas and thoughts are formed. We then saw that many responses in our body happen faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body, and often happen before we are aware or conscious of the change. Some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. As a result, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. The brain, then, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. Now, the mind appears to be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches and even several feet around the body. And some researchers, and the teachers of ancient traditions who we call shamans and yogis, say that it looks like a glowing egg shape extending from below the knees to a few inches above the head. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists regardless of whether the body is actually functioning, permeates and develops with the body and the brain, and it is fed information by the senses through the brain. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and some experiments have demonstrated that minds can vibrate along similar patterns. They resonate with each other. The bodies of people and some pets who resonate with each other have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, even though they can't be seen or heard. We've learned that mind affects energy and matter in a variety of ways. For example, in the famous double-slit experiments in quantum physics, the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. For decades now, individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts. And the collective human mind does the same for random number generators in a network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project in Princeton. Because of the nature of fields and because of things like the Global Consciousness Project, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field, what Jung called a collective consciousness. Teilhard de Chardin called it a noosphere, and others call it a global brain. And more scientists are equating mind with the quantum or zero-point field, out of which all matter and energy arises. Some people call it the Akashic field, using the Sanskrit term for the essence of everything that exists in the material world. We've also heard from researchers who are using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. With these understandings, we could explore some of the more popular ideas, like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, how we can access information in the quantum or Akashic field through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect the body and our consciousness, how music affects the body, the brain, and our connections with other fields of mind, the role of our state of consciousness in the healing process, how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing, and the placebo effect, and how we can enhance or slow down any healing process through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations. We've learned how remote viewing and telekinesis work and how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync and maximize our effectiveness in every area of life. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll find also links to the clips and the books and the authors that I mentioned on this show. Now, in our last episode, we looked again at the relationship between the left and right hemisphere of the brain. Drawing on the work of Ian McGilchrist, we saw that the left hemisphere is where we tend to focus on details. The left hemisphere of the brain governs the right side of the body, which is traditionally associated with the masculine, active, hunting aspect of being. McGilchrist identified the right hemisphere of the brain with relationships and constant awareness of what's going on around us in the larger context of a given moment. The right hemisphere governs the left side of the body, which is normally associated with the feminine, relationship-oriented aspect of being. In Asia, these would be identified as the yang, active, and yin, receptive aspects of being. Now, I suggested in the last episode that much of what Noetics is about is integrating these two ways of being, applying the focused, detailed-oriented side of the brain to the broad context, relational experience that is the activity of the right hemisphere. In our culture, particularly, the education system that passes our culture on to upcoming generations, the emphasis has been on the left brain, the focused, detailed-oriented aspect of being. And our sciences barely recognize human experience as evidence. If it can't be broken down into isolated events and analyzed statistically, it isn't real. Noetics, however, says that human experience is important, and that we can bring the analytical tools of science to help us understand human experiences that have, at least for the past 400 years, not been considered acceptable areas of research. Dr. Dean Radin is perhaps the best example of that integration in the world today. In his various roles at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, he has always brought that focused analytical mind of the left hemisphere to bear on what can typically only be experienced in the broad context relational mind of the right hemisphere. Here's a clip in which he explores that.
And so I'll start with an example of telepathy. So in order to test whether minds can be connected at a distance, There are several different classes of experiments that have been developed. The one that's probably the most mature at this point is called the Ganzfeld telepathy method. Ganzfeld is a German word meaning whole field, and it's a kind of sensory deprivation technique that was developed by Gestalt therapists in the 1930s. And the idea is that there are two people involved. One will be the receiver of information, the other will be the sender of information. Sender and receiver suggests a signal model, but we only use those labels as a way of describing what will happen in the experiment without assuming there's any signal at all. So the receiver is put into this condition called the Ganzfeld, where they have a half a ping pong ball over each eye. You tape it down. You shine a red light into their face, and so all they can see everywhere is their eyes are open, so they can only see red, like a dim red image. And then they wear headphones that play white noise, or sometimes pink noise, so they can't hear anything. And they sit in a comfy chair, so they don't really feel anything. And so it's not really sensory deprivation as much as an unpatterned sensory stimulus, which very quickly it fades into the background because nothing is happening. So that encourages your mind, which is still quite awake because your eyes are open, even though you're in a very relaxed condition, to become more sensitive to what's happening on the inside. And that's the whole point of it. So you put the receiver in that condition, and 20 minutes later, you have a large pool of pictures in groups of 4. So the 4 pictures are selected to be as different from each other as they possibly can. Usually each picture is designed so that it has a single theme in it. So you don't want to show like a picture of a circus because there's a gazillion things in there. You want to show a picture of a tiger or a picture of a clown or just one thing. You give that to the sender, randomly selected, so nobody knows in advance what that's going to be. The sender and receiver had no idea what these pictures were going to be. You give the sender this randomly selected picture and you ask them for the next 20 minutes to mentally connect with your partner at a distance and send this kind of information. And some of the versions of this experiment, there's a one-way audio link from the receiver back to the sender. And the receiver is told, speak aloud anything that comes to mind. So we can capture in real time what your impressions are. Well, that's fed back to the sender so the sender can adjust their mental sending strategy to try to evoke the response, which matches what they're trying to send. So that goes on for 20 minutes, and then the sending period stops. A investigator who doesn't know what any of the targets are will go and take the receiver, out of the Ganzfeld condition, show them 4 pictures, one of which was the one that was being sent, along with 3 decoys. And so their task is, which one of these 4 best matches your impression? So it's a 25% gain. So over the long run, you'd expect that on average, you get 25%. Well, after almost 5,000 sessions of the type that I just described, which is reported in over 100 publications by at least 20 labs around the world over the last 5 decades or so, the overall result is between 30% and 32%. That means that this difference between 5% over chance to about 7% doesn't sound like much, but when you figure the statistics on it, you're dealing with something which is around a 6 sigma result, so like 1 billion to 1 or beyond.
You can hear in Dr. Radin's explanation of the experiment the detail focus, and then in his analysis using the statistics that he really does zero in on the details. Pure left brain. And yet, he's talking about something that feels and must function in a totally right-brained kind of experience. That's what the Ganzfeld field condition, or the whole field condition, is designed to do, to shut down the left brain that is checking out what's, trying to focus on something, and there's nothing to focus on, to allow then the right brain to get a word in through the normal structure of the brain activity. Now, Radin didn't come to this research out of the blue. He has actually been interested in these things for a very long time and has had a number of experiences that have suggested to him that the experiences that he is measuring have some validity. I'll let him explain that.
When I put my science hat on, I'm thinking, this is crazy. It's crazy to think that way. Because the physical world out there does have certain regularities and laws, and you can't override them simply by wishing it so. But when I take that hat off, and I look back at both my career and other things that have happened throughout my life, I'm thinking, well, it looks like something like that is happening. So they're kind of both true at the same time. From a scientific perspective, and of course, I was trained in materialism like every other scientist, still are trained. There's an enormous amount to be said in its favor because it works really well. But as I now say, it doesn't work really well for everything, in which case materialism is a subset of a larger and more comprehensive philosophy that we have various names for it. So my current working favorite is dual aspect monism. But that's going to change because something else will come along probably. But it provides a very different way of thinking about how reality unfolds than materialism does.
I love that. When I put on my scientist hat, this is crazy. I can relate to this. And like Dr. Radin, I have had my own experiences that are a function of having been able to access the right brain without interference from the left brain, and also to be able to analyze those experiences. And as he said, what emerges is a realization that the philosophy, the metaphysics, the understanding of what the world is that underlies most of our sciences is inadequate. It doesn't work. It isn't all matter. It isn't all matter and energy. It isn't all matter and energy in patterns that we call information. The world and the universe are something more than that. And the phrase that he used, dual aspect monism, is a very useful phrase because it says it's all one. There is one unified universe within which one can see two different ways of functioning. One based on what we're calling the right hemisphere, the holistic, relational, open to discovering what's going on out there way of being, and one single-minded, focused, analytical, logical, expressing and experiencing only that which can be measured as reality. So dual aspect monism is how Dean Radin has come to reconcile the experiences of the two aspects of his mental apparatus. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me we need to look at a book and what's going on in the world today, or what you, the listeners, have said you're curious about. Now, Dean Radin has published a lot of books. His classic book, though, is The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena, which was published by HarperCollins in 1997. In this book, Dean is laying out the evidence of over 50 years of pretty rigorous experiments and providing the statistical basis for understanding how they are possible. These experiments could possibly be happening. You'll notice when we were listening to the first clip, he was saying that, the difference between the 25% accuracy that one would expect, just picking one out of four at random, and 30 to 32% doesn't seem like a lot, but when you apply the statistics, the analysis to that 7% difference, he pointed out, is 1 in 6 billion that it could happen. And that's precisely what Dean Radin brings to all of these things. All right. In the book, The Conscious Universe, Dean is offering us some pretty profound explanations, or at least examinations of some of these old experiments. In the introduction, he says, in science, the acceptance of new ideas follows a predictable 4-stage sequence. In stage 1, skeptics confidently proclaim that the idea is impossible because it violates the known laws of science. This stage can last for years or for centuries, depending on how much the idea challenges conventional wisdom. In stage 2, he says, skeptics reluctantly concede that the idea is possible, but it's not very interesting, and the claimed effects are extremely weak. Stage 3 begins when the mainstream realizes not only that the idea is important, but that its effects are much stronger and more pervasive than previously imagined. Stage 4 is achieved when the same critics who previously disavowed any interest in the idea begin to proclaim that they thought of it first. Eventually, no one remembers that the idea was once considered a dangerous heresy. I'm going to add in here that this description comes from a remarkable book that I think was a doctoral thesis at the University of Chicago called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, written by Thomas Kuhn. If you haven't encountered it, you might enjoy it. So in his introduction, Dean Radin goes on, the idea is that those compelling, perplexing, and sometimes profound human experiences known as psychic phenomena are real. This will come as no surprise to most of the world's population because the majority already believes in psychic phenomena. But over the past few years, something new has propelled us beyond old debates over personal beliefs. The reality of psychic phenomena is now no longer based solely upon faith or wishful thinking or absorbing anecdotes. It's not even based upon the results of a few scientific experiments. Instead, we know that these phenomena exist because of new ways of evaluating massive amounts of scientific evidence collected over a century by scores of researchers. As he goes on in the introduction, he says, in discussions of the reality of psi phenomena, especially from the scientific perspective, one question always hovers in the background. You mean this is for real? In the midst of all the nonsense and excessive silliness proclaimed in the name of psychic phenomena, the misinformed use of the term parapsychology by self-proclaimed paranormal investigators, the perennial laughingstock of magicians and conjurers, this is for real? And he goes on to say, the short answer is yes. Theme 1, motivation. What is psi? What does it mean to study the scientific evidence for psi? And he asks a few more questions, and then he says, to answer these questions, we'll begin by considering what is meant by psi to help distinguish it from the wild, wacky world of the paranormal. We'll reflect on how some doubts about psi can be traced to confusions over related words, like supernatural, and we'll consider what science is and how it fits into the study of psi. So that's what he's doing in that, and the section on what is psi, he provides a lot of history about paradoxes and long-held beliefs and anomalies, and he says most scientists who study psi today expect that further research will eventually explain anomalies in scientific terms. It isn't clear, though, whether they can be fully understood without significant, possibly revolutionary expansions of the current state of scientific knowledge. And part of what he goes on to say is that we tend to mistake, as he said, the map for the territory. Well, this is a remarkable book. Much of what he's doing in this book, as I said, is he's evaluating the terms and the experiments that have been done in the past. And he talks about scientific assumptions, and he names a number of the major researchers in the field. And he talks about the applications of psi in business and in the military, in technology. He talks about the role of beliefs, which is something we talk about here, and various experiments in the casinos and in laboratories. It's almost 400 pages long, providing all this marvelous stuff. And I strongly recommend, if you just want to kind of dip into it, spend some time in the index and look at what excites you. So this is The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena by Dean Radin, and it's a HarperCollins book from 1997. Well, I was going to talk about some remarkable news that's come out in the past week or so, but I will do that next time because we are out of time. It's today. That's it for today's show. But remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there are archived past shows with a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on each show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I really do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in wonderful Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.